Hello and good evening and welcome once more to this corner of my living room for another story, one of 26 stories for the 2.6 challenge for the Stroke Association. And here we are. Today's story comes to us from a country that has lots of those walled villages on tops of hills. It's one of those Mediterranean countries. And our story is set actually in one of those villages. So once upon a time, there was a village at the top of a hill, surrounded by a wall. And all the people in that village knew their way around. Everything was close enough to just get where they wanted to go to. And the market happened on a regular time and place. Everything was just so, really. And the sun would shine, and they would go out of the one big gate, down the hill and out into the fields around and the countryside, and enjoy the surroundings that they lived in. But one day, when the people were heading down the hill, they found themselves confronted by a giant. And when I say giant, I mean a giant. And he was ugly, and he was wide as he was tall, and he had a great big club that he dangled from his meaty hand. And he blocked their way. They ran. I don't blame them. They turned around and they ran back into the village, and they pulled the gate closed behind them, and they barred it and they bolted it. And they turned and looked at each other, and they tried to decide what it was that they were going to do about this giant, because he was blocking their only entry and exit. Well, they decided they would sleep on it. Tomorrow he would be gone by the morning, wouldn't he? He wouldn't still be there. So the next day, the villagers sent out the mayor, and they said, you go. You sort that giant out if he's still there. So the mayor very carefully slipped out a crack in the door, and they quickly shut the door behind him. And sure enough, the giant was still there, and he was closer than he had been before, and he was bigger and uglier. The mayor didn't even try talking to him. He just turned around and banged on the door till they let him back in, and he said, no, he's still there. There's nothing we can do about this. This giant is still there. Well, they said, maybe by tomorrow he will have gone. And the next day they decided to send out the king of the village to talk to the giant if he was still there. So like the mayor the day before, the king slipped out, had his crown on, his royal robes he had on. And he looked at this very thick leg in front of him. About there it was to his nose, and he knew the giant was still there, and he didn't even bother to look up. He just banged on the door and skipped back inside the village and said, my people, the giant is still there. I do not know what we're going to do. Well, they said, well, you know that by now. By tomorrow he'll have gone. The next morning they got up, and the giant was now so close that the whole of the village was covered in shadow. He was blocking out the sun. So they knew he was still there. And they met in the market square, and they said, what are we going to do? Who can we send to talk to the giant? Our mayor and our king wouldn't talk to him. Who can we send? And a voice from the crowd piped up. I'll go. Who said that? Who was that? And a young girl stepped to the front. She can't have been more than 12 or 13. And she said, I'll go. Well, they didn't stop to think twice. They had a volunteer. So they went to the gate and opened it up, and she slipped through, and she stood and she saw the giant, and instead of turning around and banging on the door like the men had done, she took a small step forward. And as she took a step forward, the giant took a step back. And she stepped forward again, and he stepped back again. And with every step forward that she took, and every step back that he made, he got smaller and smaller and smaller, until he was just this big. She knelt down in front of him and she said, "What's your name?" And in his tiny little voice, he said, "My name is Fear." And she picked him up and she put him in her pocket. She walked back to the village and she knocked on the gate, and they let her in. And she walked to the market square and she stood in front of them. And she took the giant out of her pocket and she said, "This is your giant. You do not need to be afraid anymore." So, thank you for listening to today's story. Try and get my words out rather than run them all together. And thank you. See you again tomorrow. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.